son, if we will read it correctly, is one in the Bible that this guy made his own choices. He looked at the father and said, I see you as dead already, so give me my inheritance. You see, a person in that day couldn't get their inheritance until the person that they were inheriting it from died or passed. And so now he says, in my view, in my eyes, and in my life, Dad, you are dead. Give me my inheritance. And he went out and spent it all and found himself in a place that God allowed him to get to, but that was not God's ultimate plan for his life. God allowed his own life and his own choices to put him in the pig pen. Where God began to speak to him is when he began to hear the voice of the Father say, you're better than this. Better is it in your Father's house to just be a slave than to be in here with these pigs. And so our choices put us in places that sometimes we don't need to be. So I want us to know, we need to understand this morning that wherever you are, God God does not just know where you are, but God also wants to use the circumstances surrounding the where you are to either initiate his plan both in your life so it will have purpose and that plan will begin to move forward, taking you to the next level in your life. What did the prodigal son have to come to realize? Just what we said a minute ago. Better to be a slave in my father's house than be here in this pig pen. And as he left the pig pen and began to walk down the road back to his father's house, what do you think he was doing the whole way when he turned that corner into the driveway? Any of y'all grew up in a place that had a real long driveway? You know, you didn't even see the house from the driveway. You turn the corner into the driveway and you're on a road that's familiar, but you cannot see home yet. And the minute he stepped on that road, what was going through his head? What was he doing? He was rehearsing the speech that he had to give to his father, that maybe his father would accept him and place him back to being a slave. But something started him on that path before he ever got to that driveway. And those things that put him on a path to get him to that point of the driveway, he thought were of himself, but they weren't. You see, it was a still small voice, the quiet voice of God, whispering in his ear to move him to that point, to walk back to the Father's house. And much to his surprise, what happened? The father sitting on the porch. When I see this, I picture my grandfather sitting on their front porch in that rocking chair he had, overlooking the river. In his driveway, you couldn't even see the front of his house from the road. You had to come all the way around to the river to come to the front, because houses then opened to the river, not to the road. And I can see as he would come and people would catch in his peripheral, he'd see to him and coming and have a word for him as he came. And I can remember Saturdays as I rode a bike to his house, him looking for me to come for a special thing that he did every Saturday. My grandfather had a TV, but it was only turned on once a week. And it was turned on at a specific time on that once a week. And I made it a point growing up that I was there to hear it. Matter of fact, before he had a TV, there was a radio. And it's at my house now, and I used to go at that specific time when he turned on that radio, off the weather station, to zero in on what he wanted. The radio, I pulled in down there on my bike to hear Cassius Clay knock out Sonny Liston. It's the only time he turned it on. The other time when he turned the TV on was on Saturdays, at a certain time on a Saturday afternoon, to hear Gordon Soley. Any guys remember him? Who was he? He was the announcer of wrestling that was on there, and my grandfather would sit in front of that TV this far from it with me by his side, and he was punching and doing and going after it. When it was over, he and I laughed, turned the TV off, I went home, and he went back to whatever he was doing. You need to understand what gets us in situations and what prompts us to go back down the road that God is calling us to the next level in our lives. So as we read this, we're going to start in Exodus chapter 1. And listen to this in verse 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already, and Joseph died. All his brothers and all that generation, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Keep your finger there and flip over to Genesis chapter 47. Verse 27. Genesis 47, verse 27. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. They had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. So I want you to understand as we look at this, in that scripture we read in Genesis, until this one we read in Exodus, where it says, and Joseph died, is 430 years worth of history. They've been in Egypt for 430 years. This isn't something that just happened. This is something that took place long ago, and it's talking about they went there and they multiplied and they grew mighty. I want you to understand what originally went to Egypt was one small family. 11 brothers, their father, and what they had with them. And in 430 years, that group of people, theologians believe, have multiplied and grown in the land of Egypt from that small handful of people to over 2 million people now living in the land of Goshen, Israel. What land did they come from? Anybody know? They moved into Goshen in Egypt, a section of Egypt, but they came from somewhere else. Do you know where they came from? Canaan. Do you know what Canaan was? Canaan was the promised land, guys. But at the point that Abraham went there, Abraham never built a house in Canaan. His descendants lived in tents. And there's a reason for it. Because in Canaan lived what? Not just giants. They lived all the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hezatites, all them ites lived in Canaan. Even some termites. And they lived in Canaan, and Canaan was not yet the land occupied and owned by Israel. It was promised and given to them, but a certain time in history comes along, and Joseph's brothers that we just read about, they don't like him. Why? He was the favorite. How many of y'all grew up with siblings? How many of you knew that one of your siblings was the favorite of the family? Paul said, me. I was the favorite. How many of you did that? How many of y'all, you're the favorite? How many of y'all others that are siblings that grew to almost disdain and not like your sibling that was the favorite? And we need to understand that is that. So what did his brothers do? They didn't like him. They whooped him, put him in a pit, sold him into slavery. He went from slavery, he was sold to a fellow by the name of Potiphar. And by Potiphar, he gained favor and was put in charge of everything because God was blessing him. And then all of a sudden, Potiphar's wife took a liking to him and tried to seduce him. And when he said, I cannot sin against God nor my master, as he turned to run, she grabbed his tunic. And when she grabbed it, it tore, and he ran out the house naked. And then she accused him of trying to come in and rape her and do things. And then what happened to him? He was thrown into the darkest prison. And from prison, he began the prison began to be blessed because God's favor was on him. But understand what God's doing right here. Is God punishing him? What is he doing? He's in the process of refining him by going through struggle. Some of us look at struggles and we want to throw them out the door because I don't like to go through them. How many of y'all like struggles? Not many. Those of you that do need to make an appointment and come into my office. But we got to understand that what do struggles do to us? We don't look at them like God's beating us down. We need to stop doing that. We need to stop looking at them like, why are you punishing me, God? And sometimes we need to understand, why am I in the position I'm in? Because I put myself here. And then who have I to blame? God or me? But in Joseph's case, did he put himself there? Well, maybe. Because what did he say to his brothers? I had a dream last night that all you guys bowed down to me. Oh, you don't think he was a little bit responsible for getting thrown into the pit? Not only that, he's coming out to give his brothers, check on them, bring them food, and what does he wear out there? Coat of many colors. What does that tell you? I'm the favorite. Here I come. All you other guys are just dum-dums. You got to understand, not only was God orchestrating the plan, but he was helping the plan go in rapider pace than what it wasn't. And what was God going to teach him in this plan? Humility, patience, and servanthood. But then at the end of Genesis, we see the real instruction God was going to give Joseph. And it's the one we got to learn today. Because how many of you have been wronged? And what's the hardest thing in the world to do when you've been wronged? Forgive the one that wronged you. And now here it is coming in. Joseph's in Egypt, in prison, and Pharaoh has a dream, and Joseph interprets it, and what happens? He gets taken out of prison. He gets exalted to the number 2 man in all of Egypt. As a matter of fact, he's en route. If it went that way, he would assume Pharaoh's position if Pharaoh passed. But he's a Jew. So what is God's plan in the whole thing? God's plan in the whole thing is here's one lone Jew in the land of Egypt. The rest of Israel is off in Canaan. One lone Jew God reveals his plan to. And he says there's a famine coming. And the famine is not just going to affect Egypt, but it's going to affect the known world all around. So what's God's plan? If he didn't step in, what's going to happen to not just Egypt, but what's going to happen to Israel? They're going to starve. Famine and disease is going to take over. So God institutes his plan through not happenstance, but direction that he takes a fella by the name of Joseph through. What plan is God wanting to establish and direct in your life and something he's taking you through? Are you kicking against it? Are you bowing before it and saying, God, what are you trying to teach me, and what do you want to do? Not just in me, but through me. And too many times, what happens? What could Joseph have done? He could have sat in slavery and sat down and done nothing and cried out, poor me. Woe is me, poor me. Everybody hates me, nobody likes me. I'm going to go out and back, eat worms, and die. And we laugh at that. But how many of us can see our very selves in that very same position? So here we have it. 430 years have taken place. Joseph goes in. They have the dream. He stores up all the grain. He does everything. And now everybody from everywhere around comes to Egypt. For what purpose? For food. And all of a sudden, years later, here's Joseph, not going by the name of Joseph, and the very brothers that threw him in the pit show up knocking on his door. He has a choice. I'm number 2 in charge here. I know what they did to me. Prepare the gallows. We're executing these guys. But what did he do? He took and got a plan that God orchestrated to bring not just the brothers, but his father and the entire family into Egypt. And he brought them there, and Joseph forgave every one of them. Matter of fact, his words were this: what you intended for evil, God intended for good. Because if it wasn't for this plan, every one of them would starve and Israel would be gone. And then God would have to start back all over again to bring his plan to bring the Messiah onto this earth, because he was doing it through his chosen Israel. So as we see everything that's going on here to start this in here, how many of us fit that very same thing? What plan is God trying to bring about on this earth through you? Maybe it's family restoration. And you've been wronged. And you have every right to be angry and upset and vindictive. But God says, swallow your pride. Humble yourself before me, and I will exalt you in due time. On top of that, I will restore your family and you. But are we willing to forgive what has happened in our past to us, that God put there for a reason to bring us to the point we're at, to speak forgiveness into our whole family and restore not just family but friends. I'm going to tell you a story, and Linda's going to cringe. When I first got saved, before I got saved, I was not a good person. But when I got saved, everything about me changed. And I mean everything. Before I was saved, there was one guy that I just did not like through junior high and high school. And every chance I got, and I'm ashamed of it, but God worked something through it. I would beat him, and I would stuff him in the dumpster behind the gym. And Linda can tell you it's true. This guy lived down the street from John Hurst growing up. I just didn't like something about him. But then God touched me and saved me. And probably 6 months after I'm saved, Linda and I go to a Bible study in somebody's house. I walked in the door, and who was there? This guy from my past. He looked at me. I saw him begin to shake. And then he crawled behind the couch in these people's house, between the couch and the wall. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Linda looked at me and said, "Do you want to leave?" And I said, "No, I've got to do something." And I heard her go, I got down on my hands and knees and crawled behind the couch with him. Asked his forgiveness. Repented before him. He turned, looked at me, forgave me, and we became friends up until the day he passed. Where is God taking you? Are you willing to allow him to work in your life to bring change that he wants to bring, to institute his plan, not just in your life, but those around you? And he wants to do it in you and through you. What are you going to do? So right now, we're looking at 430 years. Why did he take them to the place? He brought them there for a reason, and that was to save Israel. Why not? Let me ask you this question. Why not just let them stay in Canaan and feed the world through them in Canaan? Why wouldn't he do that? What? I can't hear you. It's not that you're not speaking loud. Just, I can't hear you. What did you say? I don't think it was that he needed to just separate Joseph. He had a plan for Joseph, and that plan for Joseph included everybody that was still in Canaan, because he was bringing them to Egypt. Why was he bringing them to Egypt? Why would he bring them to Egypt? What do you know about Egypt? What do you know about Israel? What was Israel's biggest problem throughout all its life? Pride. Someone said idolatry, disobedience, all of the above. What would have been the biggest problem if they'd have stayed in Canaan? Nope, we're missing it. If they would have stayed in Canaan with their small group, who would they have intermarried with? All them ites. And if they'd have married with all them ites, then what would have happened to the purity of the bloodline that God said the Messiah was going to come through? Then that bloodline would no longer be pure. So what does God do? What's his plan? He takes them out of Canaan, when they're this big and places them in Egypt, and they're given a land called Goshen. You know why? Because Egypt had strict rules. You know what the strict rules were? You do not intermarry with other nations, other tribes, other groups. You stay pure to Egypt. So God moves them out of Canaan and moves them into Goshen, where they're forced to do what? Stay within their own bloodline and group for a purpose. And for that purpose, solely to bring the Messiah. Now we see throughout his lineage, one has wandered in here and there, but the ones that wandered in are committing themselves to Israel and to the God of Israel. We see Israel, matter of fact, we see Jacob's brother Esau. What did he do? He gave up his birthright. So what do we see? So some of you guys are looking at me, well, are you saying that we can't? I'm not saying you can't intermarry. I'm not saying anything like that. He kept them with a group that believed the same, acted the same, and trusted the same. Matter of fact, in 1 Corinthians, God says what? Be not unequally yoked with the unbeliever. Why would he say that? Because it's easier to pull someone in the pool than to pull them out of the pool. I do not believe in missionary dating. If you want to date someone, pray they get saved, and then God makes them what they want to be, and you can date them. I don't care what color, creed, nation they're from. The thing I'm talking about is they got to be a believer. If you're not going to date a believer, you're asking yourself to go down a road that's a road you don't want to go on. Like it or not, that's the book. If Linda, and I'm saying this from a point because I was an unbeliever, if Linda would have had that teaching, we would not be sitting in this same church today. But God took care of her because 7 days before we got married, I got saved. So now she's no longer unequally yoked. So don't take this that I'm being biased or prejudiced or anything else. God has a plan, and the plan is what happens to you if you're saved and all you do is you hang out with the wrong people? What are you going to do? You're going to go back to them. I had a very good friend from that same era that I was just telling you about that got saved, was on fire for God, and he says, I'm going back into the bars and going to win people for Jesus. I said, you better be very careful. You know what happened to him? He went back into the bar life. And then he had to repent and come out of it years later. He's doing good now. But then it took him down a road he didn't want to go on. You see, that's when he became the prodigal, because he knew the father and he walked away and went into a place he shouldn't have been. You see, the prodigal son was always the son. He wasn't a person the father was not acquainted with. Matter of fact, he came from the father. So you need to understand, this friend of mine was of the father. He became the prodigal and ended up in the muck, in the mire, along with everybody else. So you need to understand, sometimes in order for you to grow, God needs to separate you from the stuff you're involved in order to grow you into the person that you can be, and then you can witness and testify to those old friends and bring them out of the muck and the mire. Why? Because you're now no longer the young punk they threw in the pit. You're now number 2 in charge of Egypt. And God has exalted you. And you see, God wasn't just saving Israel. He saved the entire world known at that time through Egypt. So God's not even using Israel at this moment. He's using Egypt to save the world. So what is he doing? How do I know that the purpose is for him bringing this thing to do his plan? To do the bloodline. How do I know what's going on? How do I know that this is a fact, that this is true? Go back into Exodus, verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread. Egypt was in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. What just took place? Egypt and Israel were neighbors in the same land. Israel was not in bondage. Matter of fact, now Israel had grown stronger and greater in number than Egypt was. And Egypt and the politicians and the Pharaoh, what did they see and what did they do? They began to order and bring into subjection a nation that just days before was free. And they put it in bondage, and they made their labor hard, and they made it bitter. What is the world trying to do to you? Trying to get you to denounce your beliefs, placing doubts within you. They're trying to get you to do the word that we can't do, and that word is compromise. Because when we compromise, what do? We dilute the power and the effectiveness of God's very word. And we compromise and dilute it, and we try to use it to win people, then a diluted version does absolutely nothing. And now, because that has happened in the church, now has become bitter and subservient to the world around it, what happens to church? It becomes a country club. It doesn't become the meeting place of God's people. Matter of fact, Jesus' prayer before he left for the disciples that were going to start and become the church, he said, don't take them out of the world, but keep the world from getting in them. Do you understand that? Matter of fact, we even see in Acts, when Peter and them were preaching and they took them in and they wanted to beat them and tell them, don't preach this gospel anymore. We're telling you. In another place, we're told to obey the governors and the governments of the land. Honor your leaders and your rulers. How do we honor them? By bowing to them? Do you know what Rome was saying to all of the church at the time when they said, "Hail Caesar"? They're saying Caesar is Lord. Do you know why the church would not say those words? Because Caesar was not Lord. Jesus is Lord. But when we bow to them and we do what they want, what have we become? Hail Caesar. How do we honor government and our rulers? Number one, by drawing a line. By drawing a line. That line is, you cross this line, This is the line. You cross this line, I will not obey and I will not honor you. I will put God before you and the rules that you're trying to make, because God outweighs every single one of you in Washington and Tallahassee and downtown Jacksonville or anywhere else. I will honor you. Girls, if you're going to be dating and you're worried about a guy, take your Bible, throw it on the seat between you and him in the car. Because you know why? He has trouble climbing over Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to get to you. Wake up. Guys, if you're trying to climb over the Bible, come see me. I'm going to box your ears. And sometimes, Donovan, you're going to have to throw the book down. So do you understand what God's doing? He draws the line. Draw the line. They said, who should we obey? Man or God? It's time the church grew up, stood up, and put up and said, we're not obeying your rules. We're going by His. And when you cross them, we're coming against you. I guarantee you we'd see this nation change. But there comes a time, even in our churches and our denominations, that you guys that are on fire for God need to draw the line with some leadership and pastors in your churches. And say, either you preach from this book or you ain't preaching at all. This gospel was not meant to be diluted like you do Crystal Light lemonade. So what did they do? They said, don't be unequally yoked. What's the plan they're coming against? Look what they do. Go back to here. Go back to verse 19 in chapter 1. It says, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. What's a midwife? What's a midwife? A one who helps other women in labor to deliver babies. He gives you the two names of them. He says, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, you shall kill him. What's going on here? Do you realize if they'd have done this in one generation, Israel would have been wiped out? Do you understand what this is really about? Turn to Genesis chapter 3. Who put this thought in the heads of Pharaoh? Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3 is the story of what took place when Adam and Eve ate the fruit and they went against what God said. And God comes walking in the garden in the cool of the day and He says, where are you? And they said, we hid ourselves because we were afraid. And then God deals first with the serpent, then with Adam and Eve. But as He deals first with the serpent, what does He say? In verse 15, He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head. You will bruise his heel. Do you understand that what's going on in the head of Pharaoh is I've got to stop this woman, Israel's seed, from coming into this world, to stop my plan and me having rule and reign over the earth, taking God's place on this earth. This isn't the only time in Scripture this happens, to kill the male children or the firstborn. We're coming up on a season not too long from now that a fella issued a decree that every child under the age of 2 or 3 that is male shall be killed. From Rome this time. With what purpose? Not to stop someone from taking Caesar's place, but to stop one from taking Satan's keys that he owned for hell, death, and the grave, and Jesus took them back. So Satan's plan was the same here as it is when Jesus came into this earth. I've got to stop this seed from ever coming to fruition. If I can cut it off before it gets to the point of authority, then I will have won the battle. But these midwives were something special. They came and they did what they needed to do, and they refused to do it. You see, their choice was as clear as ours is. Obey Pharaoh or obey God. Which are you going to do? That's the choice that's laid out in front of every church this morning on the face of this earth. Are you going to obey the pharaohs of this world? Or are you going to obey the God of all creation? That's what we're faced with. God blessed the midwives. If you go back and read it, they gave excuse. And God blessed the midwives, period. And everything that they did. He blessed them. The more, and I found something very interesting in here, the more Egypt persecuted, the more Egypt overloaded them with work, the more restrictions and things that Pharaoh in the world, Egypt, put on Israel, the more God strengthened and the more God multiplied and the more God blessed Israel. Why? Because they were faithful and obedient in what he was doing. As we close this today, I want you to focus on one thing. And that's back in the first few verses. It said, and Joseph and all his brothers and everybody else had died. As we get into this further in the upcoming Sundays, you're going to see why those words are important. Because when Joseph died, what happened? Joseph died, Pharaoh died that he worked with. What happened? New Pharaoh came into being. What happened? They're multiplying, but something stopped that caused major issues. You see, the people quit telling the stories. How God had delivered Israel from famine. The people stopped telling the stories how one of their own became second in charge. What's going on in the world today with all our kids? We've fallen down on the job. We have allowed government-based and schools, private home schools, or anything else to instruct our children instead of us instructing them in the ways of God. Stop letting schools and others raise your kids. You raise them. You tell them the stories. You want to read them a book? Read this book. I find it ironic that this right here used to be the stable textbook from Harvard all the way down. And now it's not allowed in our schools. So as we close today, don't let your past define you. Israel's past is gone. We see, what is God doing? God is speaking to us today, I believe, to look at our past. Not just seeing the pain, not just seeing the hole that my past has put me in, but to stop and look at our past and say, what has God done for me in the past? I can tell you, fill volumes, what He's done for me in the past. And I got to tell you, that's why as much as I love this woman right here, she will never be number one in my life. That is a place for Him. But sitting right at His side underneath that stool is this woman that God has graced me with. Doesn't make her less. It actually makes her more. Because I'm not sitting on that number one seat in her life. He is. And so together, from number two, we serve Him. What has God put in your life today, your past, that you need to see what He has done for you, to see where He's taken you? We need to see what He's pointing out in our past that points us to a future. And the future could be, if I continue on the road I'm on, I'm headed for destruction. But if I allow Him, He turns me off that road and puts me on His path that leads to everything. Scripture says that in Him is everything that pertains to life and godliness. And if I allow Him to put me on that path, then I see where my past directed me to where God is leading me. I want you to understand, in our past, I want us to look at something a little different today. Look at it from the fact that, what is God showing you? Where you've been and what He's been doing to prepare you for your future. Father, as we close this service out today, Lord, I ask that You be that. Your word says that Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. But God, when that path gets so dark that the light looks like a pinhead in a great distance, God, help us to focus on that light. And Father, let Your light come into our lives and drive out all the dark. Father, let us understand that in the night sky as we look up, that star may appear to be some tiny speck of light in a far, far away place. But God, that tiny speck of light is really a very large thing. Father, the closer we get